Not that night. Not in that room. Not when his name echoed through the grand hall of Greenridge Law Institute as its first black valedictorian. The crowd rose around him, their claps sharp and loud, but under the surface of every cheer, Malcolm felt something cold pressing against his ribs, the feeling that they were clapping because they didn't expect him to get there in the first place. He smiled anyway. That's what he was trained to do. Smile, speak well, never flinch. But before the crystal applause and curated pride, before the whispers of brilliant young man and so articulate began, the story started somewhere quieter. Malcolm Reed was the kind of man who made people pause, but not always, for the reasons he wanted. He was tall, dark-skinned, and carried the kind of posture that made you think he was born to command courtrooms. But it wasn't just his build or the pressed shirt or the way he held eye contact. It was the stillness in him. That unnerving kind of calm that made others fidget, as if he knew something they didn't. He'd grown up in Southbury, raised by a single mother who taught public school and folded laundry in the evenings to keep the lights on. His father had passed before Malcolm could memorize his voice. But his mother, Mrs. Reed, was the kind of woman who believed education was both a weapon and a shield. Learn until they run out of questions, she'd tell him. Then teach them the ones they forgot to ask. At Greenridge Law Institute, Malcolm wasn't just the only one in many rooms who looked like him. He was often the only one who refused to pretend that didn't matter. That's also where he met Claire Whitmore. She was sunlight in motion. Blonde curls that never misbehaved, laughed like a belle, and eyes that scanned rooms like they belonged to her. Claire was the daughter of one of the oldest real estate families in Easton Heights. Her life was brunch reservations, horseback summers, and dinner tables with more forks than guests. They met during a seminar on ethics and litigation. Claire challenged a professor's opinion without blinking. Malcolm noticed her before she noticed him, but not for long. She'd catch him shaking his head in amusement at her boldness. He'd find her glancing at his notes when she thought he wasn't looking. Their first real conversation happened over spilled coffee and shared outrage about gentrification case law. From there, it was study dates, long arguments that ended in laughter and walks under lampposts where the air felt like a secret. Against the odds, and maybe because of them, they fell in love. But Malcolm always knew, some rooms don't love back. The night of his graduation, Malcolm stepped onto the stage in Greenridge Hall, the room glowing with golden chandeliers and rows of suited pride. The podium stood beneath the school's seal, heavy with tradition. He wore his cap slightly tilted, robe ironed crisp, and eyes sharp. His mother sat in the second-to-last row, too proud for the front, hands folded like she was back in church. Tears streaked her cheeks silently as he walked to the mic. No paper, no teleprompter, just Malcolm in the room. He breathed once. 3 years ago, he began, I walked into this building and saw excellence everywhere, except in faces that looked like mine. The crowd stilled. 2 years ago, I submitted a report about black tenants being illegally forced out of their homes across Ridgeview. A professor told me that battle might not be worth it. Some in the audience shifted. And last year, I applied to clerk under a federal judge. He told me I was impressive, but probably too assertive to fit in. Pause, one beat. I took the job anyway. Laughter broke, short and knowing. Malcolm didn't smile, not really. Just a flicker at the corner of his mouth. He spoke not with rage, but with clarity. Like every word had been polished by truth. The law is not a ladder for the lucky, he said. It's a mirror. One that too often reflects the values of the powerful, not the people. He reminded them, rules aren't neutral. Neither are the hands that write or enforce them. And when he ended, he did so with the kind of line that cracked open the silence. I didn't come here to belong. I came to build something that lasts. Longer than your applause. They stood, not all at once. Not eagerly, Some rose like they were being tested. Others slowly, as if unsure if they should. But eventually, everyone stood. Even the professors who hadn't spoken his name in the halls. Even the donors who hadn't looked up from their phones. Even the Whitmores, seated halfway back, arms crossed, minds already thinking about dinner. But Malcolm didn't wait for their praise. He stepped down like he stepped up, deliberate, grounded. Outside the auditorium, students flooded him, hugged him. Professors shook his hand like it might rub off on them. And then came his mother, cup in his face in both hands like she needed to memorize it. "You did that, baby," she whispered. He smiled, just for her. "We did." A hand slid into his palm, soft, familiar, steady. Claire. She looked perfect, as always. Dress fitted just right, smile a little too practiced. "You were brilliant," she said. "You sure?" He teased. "Your dad didn't clap until the final line." She sighed. "Ignore him. He gets weird in public." Malcolm didn't answer. He knew what weird meant. And it wasn't new. She tucked a curl behind her ear. "They want us to come to dinner. Just family." Whitmore. Tradition. They booked Golden Elm Tavern, private room. He hesitated. "Is that ... wise?" "Just one dinner," she said softly. "Be rare. Say yes." He exhaled slowly. "All right." But in his chest something tugged. Not fear, not anger. Something older. A quiet whisper that said, "This room won't be clapping." Malcolm had never been to Easton Heights before. He'd driven past once on a law clinic trip but didn't stop. Easton wasn't a place you stopped, unless you were expected. Claire's family home sat on a hill like a monument, wide stone. Pillars, velvet hedges, and garden lights that made the grass glow like a movie set. The driveway curved in a perfect crescent. A valet waited with white gloves and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Malcolm stepped out of the car, scanning the mansion. "This isn't dinner," he muttered. Claire gave a short laugh. "Stop." But she knew he wasn't joking. She hadn't mentioned the valet. Or that they'd be eating in a private room, not the kitchen. Maybe she thought it didn't matter. Maybe she hoped it wouldn't. Inside, the air shifted. Not cold, just clinical, marble floors. Artwork with price tags instead of meaning. The scent of wax and absence. Malcolm was raised in rooms filled with warmth and scent. Dinner in his home was pepper soup bubbling on the stove. Laughter bouncing off chipped walls. Oil stains on newspaper-wrapped plantains. This was polished glass in silence. Mrs. Whitmore greeted him at the entrance. "Malcolm," she said, trying his name like a new perfume. "Congratulations." "Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore," he replied. She didn't offer her hand, just a faint smile. "Come in," she said. "Everyone's waiting." The dining room was already set, white linen folded like origami, candles flickering in crystal holders, silver so polished it hurt. At the head sat Mr. Whitmore, flipping through a leather-bound wine list. "Read," he said without looking up. The man of the hour. Malcolm gave a short nod. "Sir." Mr. Whitmore settled into his seat with the casual air of someone used to having the last word. Malcolm found the chair next to Claire, facing a woman across the table whose pearl necklace sparkled, but whose eyes were sharper than the silverware. She gave him a once-over, polite, practiced, but unmistakably examining. Like he was an item on display, not a guest at the table. With a soft, composed voice, she said, "I'm Margaret, Claire's aunt. I've heard you're quite the voice on campus." Malcolm offered a polite nod and a smile that didn't stretch far. "I try to make my points." She raised her eyebrows in interest. "Well, from what I've seen, your school's made quite the effort to uplift different kinds of voices lately." Claire shifted beside him, just enough for him to notice. Malcolm heard the loaded tone but kept his posture easy. "Greenridge doesn't pass out stages. You have to earn your place at the mic." Margaret's lips lifted into a smile. tight and satisfied, like she'd been fishing and felt a tug. Oh, no offense, of course. Before Malcolm could say more, Claire's father spoke, voice low and deliberate. So, Law? That's a beast of a career. Hours are long, stress is constant, and let's not forget all the arguing. What made you go for that kind of life? Doesn't exactly sound restful. Malcolm adjusted in his chair, fingers calmly interlocked in front of him. I grew up surrounded by people who had to fight to be heard every day. All Law did was give that fight structure. The words hung heavy for a moment, not loud but unmistakable. Mr. Whitmore let out a single short laugh. Well, you've got your answers ready. I've been asked harder questions, Malcolm replied, then glanced at the food being served. And dinner smells amazing, by the way. Mrs. Whitmore gave the smallest of smiles, perhaps the only warmth she'd shown so far. Plates were placed in front of them, wine was poured. Malcolm didn't touch the drink. His focus wasn't for relaxing tonight. He didn't just look at people, he watched them. The way Claire's aunt twisted her napkin. How Mr. Whitmore's knuckles tapped the table twice before picking up his glass. Tiny things. Tells. Claire slid her hand across to his, hidden beneath the tablecloth. A soft squeeze. He didn't return the gesture, but he understood it. Stay grounded. Margaret wasn't finished. She glanced up from her seafood and said lightly, I read that article you wrote, the one about housing inequality. You're very passionate. Malcolm's jaw moved slightly. Not clenched, measured. It's something close to home. Sure, she replied. But do you think being that emotionally attached might cloud your legal judgment? Some say the law works best when it stays unemotional. His smile returned, smaller now, cooler. Some folks can afford to stay detached. The system's already tilted in their favor. Her fork paused, just for a second. I didn't mean to cause discomfort, she said again. You didn't, Malcolm replied. You just reminded me where I am. Still, that wasn't the turning point. Not yet. That came moments later, with a quiet clink as Mr. Whitmore placed his wineglass gently down and leaned toward Malcolm like he was about to appraise an investment. So tell me, he said, steady and slow, when you applied to Greenridge, did you check any of those boxes? You know, the ones for diverse backgrounds and whatnot. Claire froze, her fork suspended mid-air. Everyone else went. Still, Malcolm didn't move. I submitted the same application everyone else did, he said, voice calm as stone. Mr. Whitmore lifted both hands, palms out. Of course, no offense. Just, let's be honest, schools are bending over backwards these days to look balanced. Not your fault, it's the system. Margaret chuckled quietly, eyes still on her plate. It's true. My friend's son got turned down from Yale Law. Straight A's, speaks Mandarin, interned under a federal judge. Got beat out by someone with less typical credentials. Malcolm turned his head slightly. Interesting. Sounds like you know all about the one who didn't get in, but not a thing about the one who did. Excuse me? She asked, clearly. Caught off guard, he spoke slowly now, not raising his voice, but making sure every syllable landed. You're assuming your friend's son was more deserving because his resume looks familiar to you. Claire folded her napkin and placed it on the table. Dad, Aunt Margaret, can we please just enjoy dinner? Her mother said nothing. Still calmly slicing her salmon, Mr. Whitmore leaned back casual. Claire, relax. We're just making conversation. I'm trying to understand the man you're so taken with. Malcolm wiped his hands with the napkin, then set it down with precision. Are you trying to understand me? Or are you seeing how far you can push before I bite? I'm just being straightforward, Mr. Whitmore said. There's no harm in that. I welcome honesty, Malcolm answered. I just prefer it without the taste of superiority. That's when Uncle Frank, the big man who'd been silent and still, finally spoke. All right, now let's not blow things out of proportion. Nobody's attacking anybody. We're just talking. Malcolm didn't even look at him. No, you're testing. There's a difference. Margaret leaned forward, raising an eyebrow. You're sounding a little touchy, Malcolm. He turned his head, calm. There's a difference between being touchy and being awake. Staying aware is what keeps people like me breathing when the room starts closing in. That landed. Everyone felt it. Even the servers moved differently, clearing dishes faster. Not meeting anyone's eyes. Claire leaned closer, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't know it would be like this. I did, Malcolm murmured back. Mr. Whitmore leaned back in his seat, voice dipping into something friendlier, or trying to. So Malcolm, any idea where you're headed now that this chapter's wrapped up? Malcolm took a moment before replying, like he was weighing how honest he should be. I'm clerking in D.C. first. After that, I plan to work in civil rights litigation. Advocacy, most likely. Eventually, I want to sit on the federal bench. Across the table, Margaret raised her eyebrows. A judge? You're aiming high. I have to, Malcolm replied simply. When you aim low, someone's always ready to lower the bar again. Mrs. Whitmore finally spoke, cutting into the conversation with a glassy voice. That's a bleak way to look at things. It's not bleak, Malcolm said. It's lived experience. Claire tapped her fingernail against her water. Glass, a tiny rhythmic sound that only Malcolm noticed. Maybe we could all take a breath, she offered gently, and skip the heavy stuff for one night. Malcolm gave her a look, soft, almost apologetic. It's not the subject. That's heavy. It's what it costs to keep justifying why you belong at the table. This time, the quiet that followed didn't feel like politeness. It felt like tension pressed under linen and candlelight. Their main dishes arrived. Duck with a blackberry. Glaze artfully plated on expensive porcelain. But nobody reached for their forks. Margaret seemed fascinated by the napkin ring. Mr. Whitmore swirled his wine like it might distract him. Malcolm calmly sliced his duck, movements deliberate. Then said, just curious, what's got everyone so fascinated with diversity tonight? Claire and I have been together for a while. Most of you barely said more than hello until now. Margaret let out a nervous little laugh. Oh, come on, don't take it that way. We've been happy for Claire. You've accomplished a lot, and you speak so well. Malcolm's brow lifted slightly. That's a compliment? She blinked, unsure. Well, yes? He tilted his head, because you didn't expect that. Before anyone could respond, Mr. Whitmore jumped in, trying to steer things. Let's not misread everything. We're not interrogating you, son. Just trying to get to know you, have a real talk. I'm all for real talk, Malcolm. Sighed, placing his utensils down. So let's get real. His tone didn't shift. His posture didn't move. But something in the air did. This isn't about law school, he continued. Or my speech. It's about me not looking like the guy you pictured your daughter bringing home. Claire's head turned sharply. She wasn't used to hearing this tone from him, level, sharp, and impossible to ignore. Margaret leaned forward, lips parting. Now hold on. No, Malcolm interrupted, not loud but firm. Let me finish. The room stilled again. I've had to prove I belong in more rooms than I can count. I know how it goes. The rehearsed politeness, the compliments that bite, the way people look for cracks without ever saying what they're really thinking. Uncle Frank, who had been mostly silent, crossed his arms and muttered, Sounds like you've already made up your mind about us. I haven't, Malcolm said. But I've lived this script before. And I don't need more nights to recognize the plot. Mr. Whitmore sighed, trying to keep the mood under control. Okay, maybe we worded a few things badly. But you're still young. You've got passion, sure. But don't let that turn everything into a fight. Malcolm didn't blink. I'm 24. I've passed the bar. I've clerked under 2 federal judges. I've written legal briefs that made career attorneys rewrite their arguments. I don't throw around words I haven't weighed." Mrs. Whitmore raised her eyes from her plate, her voice cooler than before. "You're clearly intelligent, but there's grace in knowing when to step back." Malcolm met her gaze. "And I've extended more of it tonight than I was ever given." That made her pause. It wasn't the response she expected. Or maybe it was the truth she didn't want. Claire spoke up then, voice trembling around the edges. "This wasn't how I thought the night would go. I thought they'd listen. See what I see." Malcolm turned toward her, softer now. "You hoped they'd prove you wrong. That they'd stay silent or say the right thing." She didn't deny it. Margaret tried again, leaning in with what might have been concern. "You're very measured, Malcolm. But if you carry this wall into every room, how will you? Last in law at the highest levels?" He turned to her slowly, his words calm but cutting. "I've stood beside clients who were judged the moment they entered the courtroom. I've been told my tone was too firm when I wasn't even speaking. And I've been the youngest person in rooms where I was expected to just nod along." He paused, then added, "If you think this dinner's high stakes, you don't understand what pressure really is." This time, the silence came heavy. No one reached for their food. Even the candlelight didn't feel warm anymore. And for the first time, no one tried to change the subject. Because they all knew Malcolm hadn't come here for approval. He came to make sure nothing was left unsaid. Malcolm reached for his water glass and took a slow sip. The air had thickened, not with heat, but with something heavier. He set the glass down and turned to Mr. Whitmore. "Let me tell you a story." His voice was quiet but carried weight, cutting clean through the tension in the room. "There was a woman I met during my final semester, lived in South Haven. She worked 2 jobs, took care of 2 kids. One day, she comes home to find an eviction notice slapped on her door. Never missed rent. Never caused trouble." He paused just long enough to make them feel it. But the building had been sold. The new landlord wanted higher-paying tenants, a nicer crowd. In 3 months, 6 families were gone. No court orders. Just threats, loopholes, and forged violations. The room held still. She came to our legal aid office. I spent weeks digging. Bank statements, lease terms, housing code. Turned out the landlord was filing fake reports to void the leases. Margaret shifted in her chair. Uncle Frank lowered his gaze to his untouched duck. "We took him to court," Malcolm said, his tone steady. "The judge ruled in our favor. Called it a deliberate misuse of legal tools. That case sparked an audit across the entire district." He let the silence stretch again, softer this time. "But what stuck with me wasn't the win. It was her face when the ruling came in. She wasn't just relieved, she looked seen." He placed his glass gently on the table. "That's why I do this. That's why I don't play neutral. Because staying neutral when someone's being pushed out isn't fairness. It's just quiet agreement." Claire glanced around the table. No one met her eyes. Mr. Whitmore cleared his throat. "That's a powerful example. Clearly you care deeply. But I still think sometimes people lose objectivity when things hit close to home." Malcolm gave a short breath of laughter, not mockery, just exhaustion. There's no such thing as pure objectivity. Just people convinced their version of the world is the only one that counts. That made Mrs. Whitmore finally raise her head. "So what are you saying? That everyone here is biased?" Malcolm met her eyes. "I'm saying that everyone at this table brought their own assumptions. I just walked in already knowing mine would be questioned." Claire opened her mouth, hesitated. "Maybe we should." Malcolm raised a hand gently. "It's all right. Let me finish." He turned his attention to Margaret. "You asked earlier how I plan to survive in high-stakes law if I'm always this alert. It's easy. I've been on alert since I was 10. Her expression tightened. "I've been followed around stores. Teachers wrote me up for disrupting because I asked too many questions. I had classmates ask if I got into college on a sports scholarship just because I ran track. Margaret narrowed her eyes. You're making a lot of generalizations. I'm not generalizing, Malcolm said. I'm reflecting. You don't have to like the mirror. The impact of the words hit hard. No one spoke. Even the dessert, when it arrived, something light and sweet with cream and dark chocolate. Shavings felt out of place, like trying to decorate a house still on fire. Malcolm leaned back, composed. I didn't walk in here tonight to argue. I came to meet the people important to the woman I love. But when every question feels like a test, you stop feeling like a guest and start feeling like a subject in a trial. Claire reached across the table, this time openly, and took his hand. I'm sorry, she whispered. He held her hand but didn't look away from the others. It's not your apology to make. Uncle Frank stood abruptly. Well, you've made your point. Maybe it's time we call it a night. Malcolm rose too, not in defiance, just to match the energy. I wasn't waiting for permission. But before the moment could settle, someone unexpected spoke. A quiet throat cleared at the far end of the table. Everyone turned. It was Derek, Claire's cousin, late 20s. Clean-shaven, pressed shirt. Rolex sliding slightly on his wrist. He hadn't said a word all night. Until now. You know, Derek began, his voice low but clear. I used to think all of this was exaggerated. The room froze. I thought people were being dramatic. That if you worked hard, spoke well, kept your head down, you'd make it. He glanced around the table, then back at Malcolm. Then I got a job under a manager who praised my work constantly, but never let me lead. Sighed I was too soft-spoken. 2 months later, a guy who barely made quota got promoted, said he had natural leadership presence. He let that sink in. That's when it hit me. I didn't start at the same line. And I wasn't running the same race. Margaret turned to him, voice tight. Derek, this really isn't. No, he said, calmly but firmly. This is exactly what it is. He looked at Malcolm again. I heard your graduation speech. I didn't stand right away, not because I didn't respect it. I just needed a second. It shook something in me. Malcolm gave him a subtle nod, quiet recognition. Mr. Whitmore looked like he was redoing the last hour in his head, trying to shift something that wouldn't move. Mrs. Whitmore sat still, eyes on the tablecloth. Derek continued, his voice a little heavier now. I didn't expect to feel ashamed tonight. Not of you, he added quickly, but of how easy it's been to stay silent. In rooms like this, at tables like this, no one moved. The silence was no longer hostile, it was honest. For the first time all evening, no one was performing. Mr. Whitmore tried one last time to steer the tone. Look, I'm not denying. Bias exists. I'm just saying not every uncomfortable moment has to turn into a seminar. Malcolm looked at him. It only feels like a lecture when someone hears something they've avoided for too long. Derek added quietly, or when the truth finally makes you squirm. Mrs. Whitmore finally pushed her plate aside. We didn't mean to make you feel like you had to defend yourself tonight. I know, Malcolm said. That's the problem. He didn't say it with anger. Just clarity. Margaret folded her napkin carefully. I'll be honest, Malcolm. You made it hard to speak freely, like everything could be used against us. I know that feeling, he said. I've just had more practice living with it. No one argued. The dessert sat untouched. Coffee went cold. Even the soft glow of the chandelier couldn't smooth over what had broken open in the room. Malcolm stood again, this time without hesitation. Thank you for the dinner, truly, but respect isn't just about being offered a seat. It's about being treated like you deserve it without having to justify your presence. Claire rose beside him, linking her arm with his. Derek gave him a quiet nod, a thank you, a shared understanding. And then Malcolm walked out. I didn't think They'd actually go there. Claire finally whispered on the way to home, her voice barely above the hum of the car. Malcolm didn't glance at her. His eyes stayed on the road ahead. I did. I know, she said, her voice fragile. You warned me, I guess. I just hoped maybe this time they'd surprise me. That they'd act like, she swallowed. Decent people. They turned onto a quiet stretch of Elm Street, the sidewalks empty, the storefronts dim behind drawn shutters. Malcolm's hands tightened slightly on the wheel. They didn't scream, he said evenly. They didn't insult me. But they made it clear I wasn't welcome. Not really. Not completely. Claire leaned her temple against the window. I should have stopped it, sooner. He glanced at her, just once. Why didn't you? The question hung in the air like fog. When she answered, it came slowly, haltingly. Because I didn't want it to be true. Because it's easier to believe the people you love don't think that way. And because I was scared. If I stood up to them, they might start seeing me the same way they see you. That confession pierced the quiet between them. Malcolm eased the car into a small parking lot, tucked behind a pharmacy. The neon sign above the roof flickered, buzzing in the stillness. He turned off the engine. The silence wrapped around them. You love them, he said, not accusing, just naming. I do, she whispered. But tonight made me realize they might not really know me. Not all of me. Not the version of me that chose you without hesitation. Malcolm finally turned to face her. This isn't about choosing sides. It's about what you're willing to accept from the people you love. Claire blinked, her eyes wet. I didn't see it clearly until tonight. I always knew they were a little elitist, judgy, but I thought it was harmless. He nodded once. It wasn't harmless tonight. She turned to him, voice softer now. Why didn't you walk away? You could have left. No one would have blamed you, Malcolm exhaled. Because I've spent my life walking out of rooms. That made me prove myself. I needed to know what would happen if I stayed and spoke the truth. Claire nodded slowly, and I think, maybe for the first time, they actually heard it. He reached for her hand, brushing her knuckles gently. What about you? I heard it too, she said. And I hated how much of it felt familiar. Things I've ignored, things I let slide. I don't want to keep pretending anymore. You know, Malcolm said, after a thoughtful pause, I used to think changing minds meant talking louder, writing more, always trying to out-reason people. Claire glanced at him, waiting. But now I think, he continued, it's about staying rooted. About holding your space long enough that the room has to move around you. She smiled softly. You didn't just make the room shift, Malcolm. You changed what it expects. But for him, it was never about winning, never about conquering a conversation. It was about making sure the next person, someone like him, didn't have to walk in already braced for battle. 2 days later, Malcolm was back on the road, headed toward New Haven. The sky was overcast, dull and heavy like whetstone, but the air was warm. Windows cracked, music playing low. The highway stretched out ahead like a meditation. This was how he processed, not by talking, but by driving, letting his thoughts rise, tangle, and slowly sort themselves out. He thought about that dinner. He thought about every long pause, every sidelong glance. About the restraint it took to speak without breaking, the precision. The way Beverly's voice sharpened when she felt challenged. The moment Derek's shoulders softened. The feel of Claire's hand under the table. Quiet but anchoring. It wasn't a win, not exactly, but it wasn't a loss either. It was something necessary. At a red light, he glanced at his phone. A message from Derek lit up the screen. Heard back from the board. That diversity proposal I pitched, it's moving forward. Thanks for the push. Even if you didn't mean to. Malcolm smiled quietly to himself. Another notification buzzed in. Hi Malcolm, I'm a colleague of Derek's. He shared your graduation speech with me. Just wanted to say, thank you. You said what a lot of us have felt but never had. The words for, I sent it to my team, we needed it. He placed the phone down in the passenger seat, screen still glowing. He hadn't meant to be a symbol. That was never the goal. He didn't want a spotlight, just space. But this time, he hadn't just held space, he'd changed the air. He thought of his mother. She'd probably remind him not to get too proud. But her eyes, those would have said everything else. Another buzz. Claire, thinking of you. I know this weekend didn't fix everything ... But I think it broke something that needed breaking. He read the text twice. It didn't demand a reply. It just ... settled, like truth. By the time he pulled into the driveway of his apartment, the engine ticked quietly as it cooled. This place wasn't like Greenwich. No hedges, no fountains. Just a porch light and the soft thud of a basketball bouncing somewhere in the distance. Malcolm sat there for a moment, letting the quiet hold him. He thought of all the dinners he'd sat through silently. All the compliments that sounded more like evaluations. All the times being impressive, not unexpected. But this time he said something, and someone listened. That mattered. It wouldn't transform every room. But maybe, just maybe, it would reshape a few. And that would be enough for now. He grabbed his briefcase, stepped out of the car, and walked toward the door. As he slid the key into the lock, one last thought grounded him. Brilliance isn't about speaking the loudest. It's about being so grounded, so clear, so undeniable, that the room adjusts to your truth. And maybe next time someone like him walks in, they won't be treated like a visitor. They'll be welcomed like they always belonged. If this story moved you, made you reflect, or helped you see something differently, like, share and subscribe. Because stories like this aren't just told, they're felt, and they deserve to live beyond the screen.